History Center.
Hey, you're not going to be in the video.
No, they don't need me in the video. My name is David Lawrence. We're at the Atlanta History Center. It's March the 28th, 2005. This is part of the Library of Congress World War II Veterans Project. We're lucky to have with us this afternoon Mr. John Crane. He's a native of New Jersey, but decided to move south about 1978 and has been a resident of Atlanta since then. Is getting ready to be one of my new neighbors, and he's going to talk to us about what it was like growing up in New Jersey during the Depression years and where he was at the beginning of the war and what he did and his real life experiences during the war and anything else he wants to talk about. And we're honored to have you with us and appreciate so much you sharing your story with us today, John.
Well, I'm glad for the opportunity because I would never get around to doing such a thing by myself. Well, I'm ordinary middle class, which was a good thing to be in the Depression, which started when I was 7 years old. My father was always described himself as a bus driver, which he was, but he was an independent bus driver. That means an owner-operator. And where I grew up, in Jersey City, New Jersey, in my limited tour of the country, and I've been in many, many states, but I never came across a place that had a public transportation system like Jersey City. There were about 6 lines of transportation routes that were operated by owner-operators. Every man owned his own bus. And so in the Depression, that was a good thing because a lot of people had to do without their cars or couldn't afford a car, you know. So business was never bad. And also before the Depression, he had the sideline of charter trips. And at one point, the high point, he had 6 buses beside the one on the city line. Well, anyway, let's see, my wife and I grew up in the same city, same church. Her sister, 2 years older, was in my confirmation class. And this was a German Lutheran congregation. And still at that time, in the 1920s, they still had the German element, which was the organizing group quite a few years ago. When it was only German, it had become German and English speaking, and still had a Sunday school in German, and so my wife went to that German Sunday school, and she doesn't remember any more about German than I ever knew. I had it in college for a year, but that was, well, that's getting off onto a tangent. It so happens that my memory has been of a type from the very beginning that doesn't remember things that you have to remember when you study subjects like mathematics, chemistry, or language. I can't remember, for instance, how you manipulate algebraic symbols, and what the symbols are for, and in chemistry, and in a language, I can't remember the words after a week or so, and so I always had a hard time with a language in school. And in high school, I had to take 2 years. We had a system, not A, B, C, D, but excellent, good, fair, and poor, poor being failure, and conditional, which was in between poor and fair, where you got a passing grade if you didn't continue to be conditional. And the only C that I ever got in school was in Spanish. And I took knowing that I had this handicap of not being able to handle language or mathematics, I took, of the 4 options, 4 tracks you might call them, I took the commercial, which did not prepare me for college, and because it didn't involve mathematics or any more language than the year that I took. And so I progressed. I graduated in October 1939, June, October 39. High schools in those days, I was in the only high school of the 4 in Jersey City that had a junior high section for 2 years. 7th and 8th grade were called junior high. And the options that we had, well, I'm going backwards. So I got out of high school and the repression was still on, and my father gave me the summer off. In other words, I didn't have to go start looking for a job, with no college in the plan, So he gave me the summer off, and that was nice because being in the bus business, he had to have a car, so we always had a car, and my mother had the family car, and so I had use of the family car. And this was the Bay Shore, they call it seashore, but it's New York Bay, lower New York Bay shore, called a community called Leonardo, New Jersey, and all summers were spent there. My father, when I was 3 years old, 1925, my father built this house, bungalow, literally, and he started out with his brothers to help him. He had 3 brothers. 2 of them were available to help him, and he told me a few years before he died that when I asked him about this fellow named Arnold, who was the carpenter who worked with him, it started out with his brothers helping him, but they got drunk on the job too often and weren't doing it. So he hired a carpenter, and he and the carpenter, he went down every weekend, and the carpenter was there working. And in the summer of 1925, they built this house. It wasn't completed, but the shell was up. And my grandfather, whom I have no memory of, the last job that he ever did as a union bricklayer was putting the chimney up in that house. And that's the house my father wound up in after he retired and sold the Jersey City house. He retired to that bungalow and winterized and lived there for the rest of his life. So the summer of '39 was very nice, and then at Labor Day, when the summer is officially over, and we went back to the city. My brother, 8 years younger, went back to school, and I commenced looking for a job and proceeded. There was nothing, although I looked, there was nothing on my side of the river Well, everything was in New York City. And so after, it was more than a month, 5 days a week. It seemed like an eternity at the time, every day, back and forth, one employment agency to another, And so I finally got a job as stock boy messenger, $12 a week in a drug distributor company on Canal Street. That was the Holland Tunnel exit. And at the end of about a year, I had advanced, you might say, to a clerk position in the office at $13 a week. However, the war clouds were gathering and the draft was starting, and I had the brilliant idea that it would be a sensible thing to get into it now rather than get drafted and be a little better off than a private when the time comes if we get into a war. So I quit and went to enlist and got turned down because I was not a real good physical specimen, and my eyes were bad, right, that bad back then, so I was rejected. I think mostly on account of my eyes. And so then I got another job, and then after 6 months of that, I found a job close to home where I could walk to work. And that was so good. I remembered that for the rest of my life until 1978, and I had to move down here, and I looked for a place that I could walk to work from by without using a car, without being dependent on a car. And so that's what I did. That's how I landed in Sherwood Forest. It was 1.25 miles, 1.33 miles from Colony Square, where my employer moved. And so that's where I worked until they moved out in 6 years, and so they moved out in 7 years, and I knew then they were going out, so I took early retirement at age 62, so I didn't have to move out to the suburbs where they went. So after I got this job at Westinghouse Electric Elevator nearby my house, I stayed until I was drafted. And that occurred 1 week before the time that I was actually put into, inducted. It was 1 week before Christmas in 1942. And on Christmas Day, I was lying sick in an unheated tent in Camp Dix, New Jersey, suffering a reaction from some of the shots you take, Yeah. And that gave me a psychological reluctance to take shots. I couldn't stop it, but I never liked it ever since. It was, I never had many, but I mean, it didn't bother me. It just bothered me psychologically after that. I was one of 7 neighborhood kids, 5 of us close by, and of that group, 2 were exempt. One fellow had worse eyes than I did, and he was married. He was the oldest one, about 4 years older than me. So he was exempt, and the other fellow was a divinity student. His father was a minister, and he was following in his father's footsteps. So he was a divinity student, so he was exempted. The other 4 guys volunteered to avoid service in the Army. But I wasn't volunteering. I was going to wait. I didn't consider the Army to be as bad as they did. You know, I liked walking, and I didn't look to it as something that I had to avoid. When the other fellows joined Air Force or Navy, you know. So I was the only one that was drafted. You volunteering in order to avoid the draft. And in that last job I had with Westinghouse Elevator, I saw that there is a great paper value to a college degree. And I did make a couple of attempts to do it, night school, to make up the credits that I would need to get to college, which I didn't have because I had a commercial course in high school. And the first disaster, I went to the evening school for adults. It was mainly originally started for foreign language people, you know, so but it was anything in high school, so I was taking what I would need for college. And nobody told me until the end of the term that this one was not accredited. Not accredited. I couldn't imagine such a thing. So for the next semester, I signed up in the other evening school. There were only 2 in Jersey City, which was accredited. And midway, well, I don't know if it was midway, but during then I got appendicitis, so I lost out in med studies, and things were progressing that it seemed purposeless to consider that. I was going to go in the Army, you know, and that could happen at any time, so I didn't do anything more. So now, at the end of the war, the GI Bill enabled me to go to college. Now, back to the time that I got in, the first thing that happened, in 3 weeks, I was shipped clear across the country to Camp Roberts, California for my basic training. And because of that's a very arid area. The railroad depot is at the mission of San Miguel. I believe that was San Miguel, I'm not sure about that. The nearest town was 11 miles away, that was Paso Robles. So I was put in what they call limited service. That's an 8-week basic training as opposed to the general 12-week basic training. And I don't know if it was partly because of my physique, but certainly it was because of my eyes that I was put in limited service. And there were quite a few of us whom you would look at and wonder, what are you there for in limited service, you know? I don't know about the other guys, because there was no contact, but I was one of the ones where at the end of it says, the doctor says, "Oh, Crane, we'd like you to try general service." So, Crane tried general service. And I went to the 4th Platoon of Company B in the 80th Infantry Training Battalion of the 17th Infantry Replacement Training Regiment in the West Garrison of Camp Roberts, California. And about midway through that service, I got a 24-hour pass and used it, you know, for the purpose of taking a trip to California, to Los Angeles. And so I was up the 24 hours without any sleep, and this evidently caused me to contract pneumonia. So when I came back, I wasn't feeling terrible, but I wasn't feeling the greatest, so I went out on sick call. I was told I had pneumonia and was put in the hospital, where I was for, well, I should find my notes. Can you stop this?
Yeah.
I'm going to pick up the place that I got out of the hospital after, I think, 33 days and was put in week 1 of the Company D in the 83rd Infantry Training Battalion. And so that's where I started the 12-week training that I finally finished. So I took some parts of training 3 times, you know. I like to joke about being a little slow, so they had to train me 3 times because had it happened, I got out of high school in 1939, and I got out of college in 1949, so a little slow. So I have some comments to make about training. We started, this is early 43, and we started with Springfield rifles, which was the weapon up until World War II, you know, weapon in World War I and earlier. By the time I finished this series of basic trainings and hospitalization, and there was also, they threw in a 30-day pass to go home. The trouble with the 30-day furlough was that the only transportation were the trains, which was 6 days each way. So I lost 6 days each way out of my 30 days. But by the time we got out at the end, we were using the M1 Garand rifle. The Garand was the semi-automatic, whereas the Springfield was a bolt action. And what I wanted to mention about that is that training with the Springfield involved learning how to take it apart, clean it, put it back together again. And that included the trigger mechanism. With the Garand, it was considered a fail-safe kind of thing. The trigger was sealed up, you didn't have to do anything. You didn't have anything to disassemble and clean. You had to clean the bore. Well, you were trained to clean it. In action, we never had time to do such a thing. You never cleaned your rifle. Oh, and incidentally, I haven't got it in my notes, but a little peculiarity that I always thought of the way they work things in the Army was that this unit I was with was always in a rural area. We hardly ever saw a person, and we were not in towns or cities, always rural area. And a standard issue what you get with your rations periodically was a condom, which were called rubbers in those days. And we used them over the rifle barrel, keep rain out. And in this training, we also had fired a mass-produced submachine gun that they nicknamed the grease gun. It was a mass-produced thing, just like aircraft carriers were. They were the mass-produced ones because we only had the Saratoga and the New York, or the York, I forget the name of the Yorktown. We only had those two. So all the ones that were being produced, such as where I worked in the Westinghouse, that was the Westinghouse electric elevator. They made the deck edge elevators for these mass-produced aircraft carriers. Well, anyway, they had a comparable thing for the Thompson machine gun. The Thompson machine gun was a great weapon, but there weren't many around, so they made this. And I remember it because the one time that I fired it, it caused me to cause something in my ear. And I had a battery for a good while. And I developed this tinnitus some years ago, and I wouldn't be surprised if part of it was from a development from that. The Thompsons were much better, but this grease gun that we never used, never issued, was the Germans' version was called the burp gun because it was so rapid fire. They just nicknamed it the burp. An audiologist incidentally told me a few years ago that some damage had been done to my ears, and that makes me think that it was that was part of it. Now another childhood friend of mine, I haven't mentioned any so far, have I? A childhood friend from a summertime circle of friends where my father had this bungalow. He wound up in the combat infantry also. All his friends, like mine, volunteered. As soon as he became, he's 2 years younger than me, as soon as he became 18, he volunteered and was turned down because he was colorblind. But so he wound up in the infantry, and he told me that he did have a Thompson for much of the time that he was in. He was in Italy. He saw a lot more action than me, but he didn't get wounded. I got wounded. He got disabled from frostbite. It started out at 50%, and later on the class, he's now getting 80% disability compensation because of his frostbite. You stop it again?
Go ahead.
Back to my sessions in Camp Roberts. During my stay there, it was, we didn't have much time off, but we did have Sundays, and I used the opportunity to go to a person's house, a family named Johnson in Paso Robles, I learned of them because one of my 7 neighborhood kids, his mother was a friend of this woman, and so I was able to go there for a little rest, because on site in camp, the off time, if you hang around the barracks, you might get picked up for some extra duty, you know, when the need comes along. And the USO, with thousands of guys there, was a mob scene, you know. So there was not much to do, and I was not the typical soldier in a lot of respects. I didn't go in for the gambling, the card playing, which was one pastime. I didn't look for any women, as most guys did. I didn't look for the PX or off base bar for the 3% beer they had, because I don't like beer. And incidentally, I don't like coffee. I'm a very peculiar guy. And sometimes that was a handicap, not liking coffee, because that's the only thing that was ever served. I was able to make a special arrangement with the mess sergeant in training that he'd give me a little space in the corner of the refrigerator for a container of milk, and I'd go to the PX and get milk and put it there and use that. And overseas, once in a while, what you get once in a while you'd be in the rear, and so you'd get sea rations, and they cook meals and they make coffee. And on Christmas Day, they went to the trouble of sending out a turkey dinner in little insulated containers, but of course it was cold by the time they get there, and the only drink they gave was coffee. Yeah. If you got anything, it was coffee. So I lost my place again.
That's all right.
We were back to the fact that I was going in to see the Johnsons, because camp was not a nice place to be around when you were off. It was the end of July in 1943 by the time I finished the 3rd basic training, which was the first complete 12-week one. And being in one of the minority that bothers to look at the bulletin board, I found out there was such a thing as the ASTP, the Army Specialized Training Program, a brainchild of 5-star General Marshall, who thought that it would be a good idea to train a bunch of college guys in 3 courses: basic engineering, medical, and language, for better service than regular infantrymen. So that program started, and by virtue of a score of 139 in the Army's qualification test, which I forget the name of, Army Ground Force classification test or something like that, I was offered a choice of going to this ASTP program or the non-commissioned officers program. You only had to have a score of 110 to be in the commissioned officer school. They were offering the non-com school. But I chose the ASTP, having learned of from my year or so at Westinghouse what a college degree means on paper, regardless of what you can do. So that's what I did, and the original plan was three-month sessions. It turned out that it was terminated after 6 months, and I won't go into details on that. So I was shipped off first to Stanford at Palo Alto, where I was for 3 weeks. That was the organizing phase. They were getting the program started. And that was my first experience with perfect weather. I had never been in a place where for 3 weeks in a row, every day was perfect. No rain, no cold temperature, no hot temperature, no windstorms. It was perfect. So after that 3 weeks, I was sent to Indiana University, Bloomington, Indiana, for the 6 months that I was in the program. At IU, Indiana University, we had, it was about 400 miles from home. And so when we got the break between the 2 quarters, the 2 3-month periods, I went home and got the family car and brought it back for the last 3 months, which I thought was going to be 6 months. And I think I had mentioned before, my father was in the bus business, and so he still had a car there. Well, my mother didn't have the car, or she loaned it to me. And so I took good care of it out there. I garaged it for $2 a month. And this was the bright spot, you might say, in my 34-month Army career. Even though it was academically very difficult for me, having been a high school graduate that did not have credits to enter college. The general course and the college prep course did so, but the industrial and the commercial did not, and I was in the commercial. So these credits from IU gave me what I needed to get into college after the war. It was nothing like civilian college life. The dorm rooms were comfortable for a student, and I suppose you could put 2 in one. They're not very big. Well, we were 4 in one. 4 in one, double decker. And I mentioned, I think, about my poor memory, my peculiar memory. And so there I was taking algebra and chemistry without having had it in high school. And so I resorted to hiring a college student to tutor me and scraped through with passing grades for my 6 months there. And while out there, made a trip. Let's see, I noted in my photographs it was September 9th, 1943, when I went up to Indianapolis and met my friend, one of the 7 neighborhood kids who was becoming a Navy pilot, and he was up there in Indiana at the time, and went to Indianapolis to meet me, and we had a little visit. He was a aircraft carrier pilot on a bomber. He saw no action. At that point in time, we hadn't seen each other in 9 months, and from that time we didn't see each other for 2 years, when we had a what you might call a reunion dinner for the 5 of the 7 neighbors I spoke of, neighborhood kids I spoke of. 5 of us, the mother of the divinity student organized this little reunion, and so that was the next time I saw him. Stop it again.
Go ahead.
So when the ASTP program was disbanded, I was sent to Camp Campbell in Kentucky, actually physically on the borderline. It had part of the large grounds were in Tennessee and part in Kentucky. So we trained with the General Sherman tanks. They had 75 millimeter cannon, which was distinctly inferior to the German tanks, which had 88s. They were very famous for their ability to destruct. And I remember great waste in the military, and some of it was like in this training with the armored, with the tanks. They would practice like getting out of, you get bogged down in mud, so you get out of it by cutting down every tree in sight and laying it down to make a corduroy road. And I, not there, but I remember also what impressed me later on overseas, when we were being transported from one place to another in trucks, the famous 4x4s, which is a tremendous truck. When we stop overnight, in the winter time, and I saw drivers take 5-gallon jerry cans, 5-gallon cans that's used for transporting. All the trucks carried a few. They take a 5-gallon can, take the axe, put a hole in it, and use it as a little heat for a while. And a 5-gallon gas tank doesn't last very long. This is while the people at home were rationed in gasoline. And no officer ever stopped it, unless the officers were somewhere else and never knew what was going on. But that's always stuck in my memory, such waste. And also back in in the camp, in this training, I remember what it was like to be moved around in a half track. A half track, they use troop carriers now, you see them in the, well, in those days it was a half track. 2 regular wheels in the front and the tracks in the back, and you're in this little steel box, maybe 8 or 10 guys, and boy, in a summer dusty road, that is an experience because the dust comes through the cracks. Very, you can't see anything, you can't breathe. It's really a memorable experience. And I remember endless delays also in the exercises, and developing the idea that these guys, the officers in charge, might not necessarily know what they're doing, and I wouldn't mind not being with them in combat. And of course, that's the way it turned out. And another thing I found out was what chiggers are. I don't know how they chiggers in New Jersey or California or Indiana, but when you camp out in Kentucky, you get chiggers.
Feels good when you scratch them.
Yeah. In July of 1944, I got transferred out of this tank battalion. Was that the end of the hour?
Oh, I'd like to finish it.
Okay.
Thank you.
No hurry.
So, in July, I don't know if I said this before the tape was interrupted, I got transferred to an armored infantry battalion instead of a tank battalion of the 20th Armored Division at Camp Campbell. And I soon started, after that transfer, soon started the path to being shipped overseas, which meant out of the 20th Armored Division. I spent a month at Fort Meade, Maryland, and then Camp Kilmer, which is the port of embarkation. I think that was the term they used. And Camp Kilmer was only about 20 miles from home. And as I looked out the barracks windows at big coal piles, all camps were big coal consumers. And I saw on the other side of the coal piles, public road, buses on it. So there were no fences. So I used the opportunity to go AWOL for a few hours at a time during the several weeks I was at Kilmer. And then we were shipped out, and I took a cruise on the Queen Mary. Queen Mary, with 10,000 men on it, is not quite what you would desire. The ship's exterior, all the portholes, everything's blacked out, so you don't get any light inside either. And I don't know how many men were assigned to it. As many men as there were beds, as best they could squeeze into a place. But that wasn't enough, so you had shifts. You were only entitled to be in the stateroom certain hours of the day. It was shifts. And you had to wander around the ship the rest of the time. So Ireland, we stopped at Ireland on the way to England. And I think we took the Landgibby Castle over to France. Well, a short trip, if my memory serves me, that was, well, it was a short trip. And there, we were all put in the hold, the cargo hold. And they had bunks, like hammocks. Well, they weren't hammocks like the Navy uses, they were bunks, about 8 or 10 high. 8 or 10 high. I always remember that. It was not until late November of 1944 that I reached the front lines and joined Company E of the 157th Infantry Regiment of the 45th Division, 7th Army. That was at Rambervillers, France. And then at the time of a division rest, I think it was, I used the opportunity to request a second pair of glasses. It's standard practice, it was standard practice for any soldier with eyeglasses to have 2 pair. And I had 1 pair, and I don't remember clearly how it was. It may have been the time that we were going through a bombed out factory, some small town, and they had told us the officers said, drop your packs and we'll come back and get them later. But we never came back and got them later. So I lost my correspondence records, name and address book, you know, and what correspondence I was keeping, and personal belongings like a second pair of eyeglasses. So I used the opportunity of the division rest to ask for a second pair. Well, the way they do that is they don't have the records available to just send you a pair, so they send you back to the hospital. And then I got examined, and they took so long in that by the time I got back, they didn't put me back in the same place, and I was put in F company instead of E company. During the winter division rest, I guess, I qualified for the grenade launcher. The grenade launcher is a way of firing a hand grenade from a rifle. And the flamethrower, well, I never used either in combat, but in those training exercises over there, I used the grenade launcher once and found out that, to my surprise, they used concussion grenades, and found out that they can go off without you knowing why from a little twig. Of course, apparently I was in a somewhat sheltered area, and evidently hanging down from a tree was something that I didn't notice, just some little twig, you know, something. Of course, it went off right in front of me. It served as the signal, which was what I was doing it for. When I was told I would be the one to give the signal when they were going to move forward in the next part of the exercise. So when they gave me the signal, that's what I did. So they heard it, but it didn't go off out in the field where it was supposed to go off. It went off right in front of me under the tree. And that was a noise that was big enough to have damaged my ear also, I think. On one occasion, when I was advancing, I was a point man in a squad. When you're advancing into enemy territory, first one is a point man. And I came to a house where there was a young German soldier who was wounded. So he was, or take his shirt off, he was showing me he was wounded. He come out to surrender, babbling in German. And I judged from the propaganda that the Germans told the soldiers about what the Americans do, what they like, you know. He was expecting to get shot, so that's what he was very excited about, I guess. And all he wanted to do was surrender, so he was able to do that. Another occasion, we were in the same position long enough for us to dig a foxhole and cover it. There's always two-man foxholes when you were in a place for a few days, because you were always you spent the night on 2-hour watches. You exchanged with the other guy 2 hours. He watched 2 hours. You watched, and sleep in between. Sleep the other 2 hours. So for that period of time, I got a flare booby trap, set it up outside mine, and I caught a prisoner that way. On another time, when I was on patrol, again, the point man, that means you're supposed to be the one furthest out, nobody else. But this is hill country, all woods, that's what we're in all the time. And so when I saw movement down below, I assumed it was enemy soldier. And it wasn't practical to do much, so I just threw a grenade, which I don't think could have reached him because it was not that steep a hill. I mean, he was not that far away. And throwing a 8-pound grenade, if that's what they, you can't throw it like a baseball. So that's all I did, and it was through. And then later on, I found out that it was one of our guys. It was a point man of another squad, you know. And he was coming from the other direction. But see, we're going far enough away. So he had wandered to one side and I wandered to the other side, and then he had reversed course a little bit, or I had reversed course. So anyway, it was another man. So this made me realize that I knew my eyesight was not so good, and I probably could have recognized from the shape of his helmet or the color of the uniform if I had 20/20 vision, but I didn't. My eyes were 20/20 under optimal conditions over here with eyeglasses, but over there, things are not that good physically, and you don't have 20/20 vision. And so I always thought about that, and then when the time come, much later, March 15th, we were, by then I was a sergeant. A sergeant is assistant squad, plane sergeant, buck sergeant, is assistant squad leader, and his position as you move forward is at the end of the squad. So we were at rest at this one point in the woods near the border of Germany and France.
That's it.